So I assume back in May, Dan, you weren't basing your opinion on trouble in China, which is what we just said. Tim Cook, I mean, that's how Josh started his report, that he blamed it on China. Is this China's fault?
Well, no. If you go back and you read that report, we talked about the fact that selling very high-priced phones in emerging markets was going to be tough, and that we thought Apple, this was the wrong strategy. So if you go back to that report in May, a lot of what Tim Cook's blaming things on today, we knew about way back in the middle of last year. So if you kind of think about some of the things that we're talking about, said, well, consumers are adapting to a world with fewer carrier subsidies. Well, if you know anything about AT&T or Verizon or those companies, you know they've been cutting back on subsidies for a couple of years. That's nothing new. He talks about U.S. dollar strength. If you actually look at it from November 1st when Apple reported, the dollar was at 96.30, the trade-weighted dollar. On December 31st, it was actually lower. So that's obviously not a new problem either. And then taking advantage of iPhone battery replacements, if you remember last December is when Apple started offering new batteries, and we talked about that in the report in May as well. So a lot of these things are out there, and so I think and China itself, their average GDP per person is $10,000. In the U.S., it's $63,000. If you're trying to sell 3 phones at above $1,000 a phone, a year ago you were trying to sell just 1. You can't push that kind of ASP increase and expect emerging markets. And if you remember back in the September quarter when they reported and they guided, they had problems with, I think it was Brazil, Russia, and India. India's GDP per person is even lower than that. So, these are the issues that were already out there. It's just, I think part of the issue here is that Apple's not acknowledging the real problems that they have, which is they push the ASPs up too much. The lawsuit with Qualcomm made them push out iOS releases before they were ready, and that's been talked about in magazines such as Forbes in December. And quite honestly, I'm not sure they're going to have a 5G phone out in 2019 when a lot of the carriers are going to push out 5G networks, and so they're kind of behind on the technology. So until you sort of acknowledge these issues, and the final one obviously being that the cell phone market is shrinking for the first time in history, and it'll probably shrink even further in 2019, you can't fix the problem until you acknowledge what the problems actually are or you recognize them.
I mean, we're talking about the stock all day long. It's down 8.5%. And I don't know if we're really characterizing everything that's happening as a huge surprise or not, Dan. I mean, the stock's down from 1.1 trillion to 700 or below that today. So everything you just said, someone knew what was happening in terms of shareholders, because the stock is already. And how much, if you were an analyst again, a lot of this bad news was already probably in the stock. I don't know what it does today, but is it at a level now where obviously it's a more fairly priced than before, but is it at an attractive price now in your view?
No, it isn't from a long-term perspective, because a lot of what I just talked about, the iPhone market or the smartphone market shrinking for the first time in history. If you think back to PCs, 2011 was the last year the PC industry grew. And then as replacements rates started to elongate, the PC market shrank for 6 years in a row, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. This will be the first year it grows. And I think with the cell phone market, you're in a similar spot where you're going to see contraction for several more years. I think Apple having ASPs that are way too high. I mean, they were up 28% in the September quarter. So they were already going in the wrong direction for an economy that's slowing down.
Yep.
And, that was just bad on their part. And then pushing out operating system releases before they're ready, that just makes no sense when you're having troubles already.
In your view, what portion of the problems that we're talking about today are caused by the trade war with China? What is it, 10%, 50%? What in your view?
Yeah, my view is it's not de minimis, but it's 10 to 25%. But the trade war was going on when they guided back in September. I mean, arguably, you could say things are better today, right? We didn't push tariffs up to 25% on January 1st. We delayed them. China's actually trying to stimulate their economy. So there are also some positives. in China happening since when they guided. So you can't dismiss that either.
But there are some Apple-specific issues that you have highlighted that aren't going away and that were evident in the comments from yesterday.
Right, and then you got to remember this year we're going through an important transition in the cell phone market where we're going to be pushing out 5G platforms starting in the June quarter. And Apple, as of right now, doesn't seem like they're going to have a 5G phone ready. So they're actually going to be behind. So if you're looking to spend $1,000 on a phone, why are you going to buy a phone that's one generation behind in technology?
No.
I mean, 2019 could be an even uglier year to some degree in terms of how much the market shrinks for Apple because they don't have the latest and greatest phone. And if you're going to charge somebody $1,000 for it, it better be the latest and greatest phone.
You think they're going to slash prices?
I think they have to, right? How can you sell a $1,000 phone in a market like China where the GDP per person is $10,000? In India, it's $2,000 a phone. And if you go back to the September, earnings release, they talked about the fact that India was way below where they thought. Well, if your average GDP person is $2,000 and you're trying to sell a $1,000 phone, it's going to be probably pretty hard to sell it. They probably want to eat. So I think those are the issues there.